here because the German-financed Jewish hospital, Michael Reese, on the south side, did not keep kosher, and they did not want to hire Eastern European Jewish doctors. They were sort of kept out. So the Orthodox in this area was mainly Orthodox, whereas the German Jews were becoming Reformed. So they raised enough money and opened the hospital, which at its peak was quite a well-known hospital. A lot of research was done here, although
it's still done here from what I understand.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Mount Sinai is known for research and also for its trauma facilities.
Right. Although I had my tonsils out twice here. But some of my family were here and they were always treated well and got good service here. Now, the hospital serves mainly the blacks and Latinos living here, although it's still supported somewhat by the Jewish community, Jewish Federation. And I understand the poor Jews and the recently arrived Russian Jews could get basically free service here.
So it still does its part for the community,
yeah,
including the community at large here.
Right. The early settlers were Irish and Germans and Bohemians. The Jews didn't start coming until about 1910. And most of them who came into the area came from the Maxwell Street area, which is where the early Eastern European Jews had settled. By 1910, they had sort of worked their way up and they wanted to get out of what was really a physical ghetto in the Maxwell Street area. So they started moving in to Lawndale. They were met with opposition by the Gentiles living here, but some of the Jews started buying some of the homes, and once they had a Jew on the block, pretty soon the whole block changed, and by the 1920s, the whole neighborhood had changed. Roughly, it would be Western Avenue on the east, Arlington on the north, Cicero Avenue on the west, and roughly Ogden Avenue on the south.
Yeah, for North Lawndale. South Lawndale would go probably to what, 26, something
right.
like that?
South Lawndale would be adjacent to the south. And then further west was Austin, which was a smaller Jewish community with about 8,000 Jews. The Lawndale area had about 110,000 Jews around 1930, 1940. And it was the largest Jewish community that Chicago ever had. In fact, at that time, it had about 40% of all the Jews in the whole metropolitan area.
Wow.
And the greater Lawndale area had about 70 synagogues, including some that were in the homes of rabbis, the so-called shtiebel shows, which a rabbi had a following, and he set up his living room as a little synagogue. As a matter of fact, there were a few Bohemians living in the Jewish area, and one of the few was my neighbor. The next door neighbor was a Bohemian family. The grandfather had bought it, and the son was my best friend. So we, of course, were Jewish and the Bohemians, but there were no other Bohemians around. In fact, there were hardly any Gentiles. In my school, grade school, I think out of 35 kids, there may have been 2 Gentiles. All the rest were Jewish.
Well, my name is Richard Dolish. I'm 83 years old. I've got a lot of titles. Right now I own and manage a real estate sales and management firm in Lyons, Illinois.
So you grew up north of Ogden in what was basically the Jewish neighborhood.
Exactly, it was all Jewish. I was the little Goyim kid. during the holidays, they won't shut off the gas or electric, or they're not supposed to do anything. And I was prevailed upon to come in and shut gas off and turn the electric on and help take down the sukkah. Sukkah, you know, sukkah, they have a little...
Yeah.
I'm not really totally familiar with all the Jewish religious
You were
backgrounds.
the token non-Jew who got to do all this stuff because
That's
they
right.
couldn't use machinery.
That's right. And I enjoyed that because I was in demand. There weren't too many. You have to keep in mind, when I say I was non-Jew, there were only a few non-Jews in the whole community. On our block, there were 3.
This was when, more or less?
This was from 1941 to about 1962.
Okay, so that would have been considerably after the Bohemians had built up.
Oh yeah.
Millionaires Row.
This was all Jewish then. This was
yeah.
the school I went to William Penn Elementary School. There was only 3 kids in our class out of 60 that weren't Jewish. So we were truly a minority. And on the holidays, there was only maybe 15 or 20 kids running around school. All the Jewish kids were off on holiday.
You were responsible for naming Little Village, weren't you?
Yeah, my wife and I got to give my wife credit, otherwise she'll kill me. My wife and I were sitting in the restaurant. There used to be a restaurant on 24th and Pulaski called Little Village Restaurant. It was a Bohemian restaurant. And we were sitting there and we were talking, what are we going to do? Because it was tough. It was times when the Mexican people were not yet moving into the community. And we were having a lot of people moving out of the community.
This was what year?
This was about 1957, 58, and 59. Those in that general area, and I can't recall the exact date, but it was in that area. And we said, we've got to do something because people don't want to buy here. People don't want to move here because they were apprehensive about what happened in North Lawndale. North Lawndale changed suddenly and seriously bad. There was a lot of problems in North Lawndale. And everybody heard the term Lawndale, they immediately thought it was going to become a ghetto and a terrible place. So we said, we got to eliminate that name Lawndale. And it was hard to do because a lot of the old pioneers, E. John Sirasinski from Second Federal, I want South Lawndale Crawford, that's what I want. Well, we thought we got to come up with a different name that will appeal to, first of all, the Czech people that are there. Secondly, to the Latino who we thought were going to be coming in. We weren't sure yet, but we thought we could entice them to move into the community. And then there was also, during that time, a revolution in Europe, and a lot of people were moving out of Czech Republic. And we thought we could get some of those. And then there's also Serbian. There were a lot of people from Yugoslavia who, because of the turmoil in Europe, were coming to the America. And we thought maybe
the failed revolution.
Right.
Dubček, Sloboda.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I remember.
So we were trying to entice. We were figuring, how do we entice these people to come into our community? Because we got housing here, not the finest housing in the world. It's decent housing, but it's low cost housing. And so we said, well, let's come up with a different name. We said, what about Little Village? My wife said, what about Little Village? So yeah, that might be it, because most of these people from either Yugoslavia or Czech Republic or Mexico, they all come from little villages. You don't get many people coming from Mexico City. They do, but mostly from little villages. We said they would relate to that if we used that term. So we came up with the name Little Village, and I had to go around and sell it to the Chamber of Commerce, which was easy. I was president then, the Community Council, the Real Estate Board, the Council of Financial Institutions, which was very important. That was an organization of all the banks. They are the ones that provided all the money, you know.
Sure, the money guys had the
Right.
last word.
And they are the ones that provided that money, and it was very important to us. So we've got them all to accept and change the name, and then we came up with a logo with a mushroom, and we had things put on all the lampposts, and it took. And Latinos, particularly Chiquita Villa, now that's their home. That's the primary Mexican suburb. They call that the Mexican suburb in the area, and probably in the United States. So it came out very well. But it wasn't easy. It took a couple of years of constant application and going before all these organizations and getting to change all their stationery and do all the other stuff.
Now, this synagogue came from Maxwell Street. It was around Taylor, just west of Ashland there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it moved here, and it was one of the bigger synagogues in the area. And it had a large Hebrew school, which was right behind there. And one of those who went to the Hebrew school was Benny Goodman. And I understand the Hebrew school had a little band, and he played in the band. And this, a few years ago, looked like it was a rundown synagogue, but evidently they had enough money to really remodel it and made it into a very nice looking building. The big movement started after World War II. And one of the main reasons they moved was, for one, they had become a little more affluent during the war. Many people had jobs and saved some money. There was government aid for the veterans returning, and there was the thought of not only Jews, of others, of having a home of their own. And Lawndale had very, very few single-family homes. So that was one of the main reasons that they moved out. Also, I suppose they were looking for areas with maybe more amenities, better schools, a little plot of land of their own with a yard. In Lawndale, most of the homes were 2 flats. There were 3 flats and apartments, but very few single-family homes. And that was a trend of many of the different ethnic groups of getting a home of their own, and the government made it easy after World War II to get a home of your own.
Why was Sears so attractive to people who lived on the Jewish West Side as an employer?
Well, it had the type of jobs that the Jewish liked. The Jews didn't work much in factories, with machinery and things like that. There were some, and the Jews worked a lot in the clothing industry in the downtown area. But Sears in Lawndale was mainly an office building in a sense. Buyers, administration building, the buyers, the catalog facilities, and my wife worked there in the jewelry buyer's office there. So it was more office building. It wasn't where you manufacture things. And the Jews were, in a sense, more merchants or white-collar workers.
So, Boys Brotherhood Republic, what was that?
This was funded by the Jewish community, and it was mainly crafts and some sports, but it was known for the fact that the boys here governed themselves. It was sort of self-governing. Right around the corner, there was another youth center, which is called Marcy Center, that the Jewish kids used to use, but it was run by a Dutch Reformed church. And the feeling was that they were trying to convert the Jews. But the Jewish kids would use it because they had movies there and athletic facilities. And Christmas, they had a lot of candy, so the Jewish kids would go there and eat up all their candy. It also had a medical facility in case anybody got hurt. But Jewish kids were suspicious of going into a dispensary.
You mentioned, I think, at one point earlier, there was one Reformed shul.
Temple Judea. It was on Independence, just south of Roosevelt Road, on the east side of the street. And it was a nice synagogue. It initially had a fountain in the front and a nice floral arrangement. But most of the Jews, probably 95% of the Jews, belonged to Orthodox synagogues. So when they passed that Reform synagogue, they were a little suspicious, where
the men and women sat together, where you could go in without a skull cap, where you could drive up in your car if you had a car, on the Sabbath. So they were very suspicious of it, and many of them would imply that it must be supported by Christian missionaries. But it was very progressive. It had a very good youth organization and had some great lecture series. I remember Clarence Darrow, the famous attorney, spoke there once. So it was quite different than the others.
When he came, what year was that? Do you know?
God, I don't know if it was 66, 67, 68, somewhere around that time.
But he stayed in an apartment near here?
Yeah, there was I think it was a 2-story or 3-story building right around here. And he was here for several months, campaigning and getting in the hair of Mayor Daley.
Oh, yes.
But the building was torn down, and because of his historic importance, they built this rather big apartment complex, which is named after him. The predecessor of this was the Chicago Hebrew Institute on the fringe of the Maxwell Street area on Taylor Street, Taylor and Lytle Street. And then as that neighborhood changed, they built this building, which opened in 1926 and lasted until, I believe it was 1955, when the neighborhood changed. And they built Jewish community centers up on the north side and in the suburbs. This was probably the busiest and best known institutional building for the Jewish community in Lawndale. It had all kinds of activities. They had classes in Hebrew, in Yiddish, and in English. They had a Central Hebrew High School, which had hundreds of students, I think 600 students or so. They had a gym, a swimming pool, an orchestra, a theater group, a museum, a restaurant which was called the Bruce's Inn, and on Sunday evenings in the summer they had dances up on the roof, where many a match was made there, where young Jewish people and not so young Jewish people would come and dance under the stars to a live band. So this was a very, very busy place. And right across the street was the Hebrew Theological College, which turned out practically all the Orthodox rabbis in Chicago and a good part of the Midwest. There were hundreds of rabbis turned out through the years. Next to it, there used to be the Jewish Home for the Blind. Across the way there was another big synagogue, which was torn down and replaced by a black church. That's one of the few synagogues that was torn down.
Now, how easy was it to get around in terms of transportation from North Lawndale to, let's say, the city center, downtown Chicago?
Oh, transportation was good. There were all different modes of transportation. You could walk from my house, you could walk less than 2 blocks and catch the Douglas Boulevard bus, which would take you downtown. Or a little further, you get the Roosevelt streetcars, some of which went downtown. South of us, there was the Douglas Park L a few blocks away. And to the north, there was the Garfield Park L. And there was a 16th streetcar, which was a half a block from my house, which went actually to the Maxwell Street area. It didn't go downtown. So transportation was no problem, although very few people had cars. My parents never had a car.
Well, you didn't need it for shopping. Everybody went to Roosevelt Road.
Yeah, and there were grocery stores on every corner. On one corner at 15th Street, there were 2 grocery stores opposite each other. And on the other corner at 16th Street, there were 2 candy stores that sold cigarettes and snacks and stuff like that. So you didn't have to go far. There were bakeries a block or two away, and butcher shops a block or two away, kosher butcher shops. So you really didn't have to go to Roselle Road, but if you wanted to go to some of the bigger stores and the better clothing stores and the movies and the better restaurants, you go to Roselle Road.
Okay, so Golda Meir, tell me about it.
Well, she was born in Russia, and then she and her family, they moved to Milwaukee, where she really grew up. And she became an ardent Zionist. And at one time there was a Zionist convention in Milwaukee, and some of the Zionist leaders heard her speak there. Mm-hmm. And they said, "You're too good to be wasting your time in Milwaukee. Come to Chicago." So she came to Chicago, and one of the Zionist leaders got her this apartment here. She lived in Chicago a number of years. She was a librarian in the Douglas Library. She used to come and speak at the Labor Zionist building at 3322 West Douglas Boulevard. And then she moved to Israel and became the prime minister.
As the Jews were departing from North Lawndale during the 50s, what they did do, even though they took a lot of their organizations and associations with them, basically sold the property and said, "We're taking them along." Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah, they left almost everything. All the synagogues, there were, in the sort of greater Lawndale area, there were over 70 synagogues. They were all left. The JPI, which was the big Jewish community center, was left. The Douglas Park Auditorium, which was sort of a community center. Labor unions used to meet there, fraternal organizations. There was the Workman's Circle, sort of a socialist group, met there. They had a Yiddish school. And the three boys' clubs that were in the area, the ABC, which was the American Boys Commonwealth, the BBR, which was the Boys Brotherhood Republic, and Marcy Center, they were all left there, and they're still there.
We moved here in 1958.
Oh, okay.
We were down in 14th Street, and we moved here because they were building the Dan Ryan Expressway,
okay.
before the Dan Ryan,
Yeah.
going out. And so we moved here in 58,
Yeah.
and I've been here all my life. I was born in 59, and some of the members that are still here was from when we moved down. Moved
Okay.
from down.
Some of the members from the area to the east are still
Yeah,
here?
still members here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the German Jews were the more wealthier.
Yeah, they came here first, and they were wealthier. They started a lot of big companies. They did well in the professions, and they lived separately from the Eastern European Jews.
Okay.
They had their own synagogues, their own newspapers, their own children's camps. And they even voted differently. The German Jews who were a little wealthier, they voted Republican. The Eastern European Jews of this area voted Democratic. And an intermarriage in those days was when a German Jew married an Eastern European Jew. It didn't happen very often because they were different social classes, economic classes.
Yeah.
So this was a well-known synagogue. In fact, one of the top cantors, his name was Yossel Rosenblatt, came here for the high holidays. He was a top-notch. He came actually from New York, from Europe originally, and then he was in New York, and he was so good, the opera company wanted to hire him, but he didn't want to become an operatic star because he'd have to perform on Fridays and Saturdays, which was against the...
Yeah.
But he was the top man, and all the synagogues were trying to get him, but this is the synagogue where he went to.
How you keep so sharp? I need to know so I can.
I'm losing it.
No, you know.
What to you was the great lesson of the departure from North Lawndale, if there was one?
The great lesson? Well, one, unlike other neighborhoods, it was a peaceful departure. There was, as far as I know, there was no burning of crosses or name calling or throwing stones or anything like that. The Jews moved out and the blacks moved in, and it was a very peaceful transition, whereas in other neighborhoods you had all kinds of events, physical things against the blacks. The other lesson was that unfortunately you have the wandering Jew. Here they invested so much money, built these beautiful synagogues and other organizations, and they were basically abandoned. Although most of them, or many of them, were restarted in new neighborhoods. But here, they had worked so hard and given so much to build all these beautiful facilities and homes, apartment buildings, and as far as the institutions, they were virtually given away.
I understand there's somewhat of a preservation movement now to try and retain some of this architectural legacy.
Yeah, there was a big movement to retain the what was called the Rosh Hashanah, the Anshe Knesset Israel, which was probably the biggest and most popular of the synagogues on Douglas Boulevard near Holman.
I understand it was also one of the earliest ones to be
Yeah,
built.
it was there, came there out of the Maxwell Street area. Most of the synagogues came from the Maxwell Street area. That came in 1913, which was just about when the Jews started moving in large numbers. But there was a movement. I went out there protesting to save it. There are quite a few Jewish people, and the Jewish community managed to save some of the plaques, that had the names of those who died,
Yeah.
and some other things from the synagogues before it was torn down.